Delmarva Today with Don Rush.
This week, Mayor Jack Heath announced that he was withdrawing from the mayoral race, citing health concerns. And that has led to a last-minute candidate in the race, Councilmember Megan Outten. You're listening to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush, and we have Megan in our studio this afternoon. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Don. Thanks for having me.
So, first of all, let's get to Jack. Was that a surprise? What was your reaction? Was that anticipated? What was your sense about that?
I wouldn't say it was anticipated, but I will say the two of us had a pretty candid discussion over the weekend. He did confide in me, just where he stood, how he was feeling in terms of his health. And it became pretty evident that, this was a gentleman who had been a pillar of his community for so many decades and had been essentially waiting for that next generation to take up that pillar of that community. And I think we had just a moment where I candidly said, I'm ready. I'm excited. I'm ready to dive in. And I told him, I was like, I'm going to throw my hat in. And he was very candid and said, you have my full support. Jack and I have worked together now for about 6 months. He's been a wonderful colleague and a mentor, even at times, to work with. So it really meant a lot to know that he, essentially gave me his blessing with this.
So also, by the way, I talked to Amir Boda, the president of the council. Mm-hmm. He says he's backing you. Certainly, the former mayor, Jake Day, said that he thought you'd be a good candidate. Was there some discussion going on behind the scenes in terms of whether or not you should run? Because if Jack had left, that would have left, say, two other people who don't have necessarily a direct connection to what's been going on the city council. Was that a consideration? Was there any discussions going on?
I wouldn't say there were any discussions happening behind the scenes, but I think it was becoming apparent that we needed a candidate that had both the experience and the energy to engage with the community. And Jack, while he had a number of years of experience underneath his belt, we needed someone that was really willing and ready to energize the entire community at large, not just a specific pocket of the community.
So in terms of your candidacy, did the fact that you had two other candidates that were not necessarily all that experienced or not certainly directly pulled in, was that a factor then in your thinking?
Absolutely. I think the other two gentlemen who are in this race, a lot of respect for the work that they do for their community. But at the end of the day, when it comes to the role of mayor, you need someone who really has a genuine and comprehensive understanding of the issues that we're facing in this community right now.
So one of the things that has come up is the downtown development. Mm-hmm. And there's gotten a lot of pushback from some of the business owners who say there are not enough parking lots, or we haven't planned for enough parking spaces, as it were. How are you going to handle that pushback? Because there does seem to be some real concern that the city has not been that transparent.
Yeah, and then that's another reason why I kind of threw my hat into this, is because I really saw the need for some additional transparency at the local level. I think that's a reason why a lot of the community started to feel disengaged from the city. And the concerns we're hearing from the business community are real concerns. So I was very appreciative that Mayor Jack Heath and our city administrator, Andy Kitzrow, kind of jumped on the ball once it was apparent that the local business community had concerns. And we're currently in the process of developing a really comprehensive parking master plan that's going to be presented to the public here in the next coming weeks. And I'm really hoping that this is a comprehensive parking plan that's been worked and collaborated with a lot of the local business community downtown, given feedback on this master plan. So I think hopefully when it's presented, a lot of questions will be answered and provide some more clarity on the direction we'll be taking with downtown.
Yeah, obviously this plan has been in the works for some time, obviously before you came onto the council. Where do you think the city went wrong in terms of getting the business community involved, or at least feeling that it's involved?
Yeah, and I have mentioned this a couple times throughout my last 6 months here, which is COVID really did a number on this community in terms of how we engage with them. And I will say, prior to COVID, this city went above and beyond when it came to transparency and engagement and feedback from this community. However, I think we just kind of laxed a little bit. We got a little comfortable with ourselves, and I'm really ready to re-energize. I think we do our best work at the local government level when we have the collaboration of our citizens. So we really need to reinvigorate some of those committees, commissions, and genuinely put forth a good effort to engage with the community before we make these decisions and calls that are going to impact a good portion of our population.
Now, I find that one critique of the downtown plan is that it's, in many ways, some of the critics say there's a big giveaway, whether it's tax abatements, whether it's water and sewer, or just the price of the land alone. Do you have any sense, and you're just sort of coming on here, but do you have any sense about why it is that downtown seem to be so unattractive to businesses that the city had to make these kinds of gestures? Or, I mean, I don't know if you've thought about this or not, but that's one of the things
Yeah.
that's really struck me.
I wouldn't say downtown's unattractive to businesses, but I will say, and this is something that we're seeing in a lot of municipalities and counties across the state, is we need these incentives to encourage housing. I'm sure you've heard this echoed numerous times with your other interviews. We are currently facing a housing crisis, and Salisbury isn't alone. These are municipalities across the state are experiencing very similar issues, and we're not just talking about affordable housing crisis. We're talking about a housing crisis as a whole. So these incentives, while I do respect a lot of the concerns that are coming from some members of the community, provided us the opportunity to have this development come to our city, because I don't really believe without those incentives we would see a lot of the housing that we see here today. A housing that I have personally benefited from as a renter myself and a young professional myself, right out of college. If those houses weren't there, I unfortunately may have had to leave the area. And we have so many young, talented individuals between SU and Warwick and UMES who graduate and unfortunately have to leave the area because we don't have that housing for them. So we talk about how we want to make Salisbury a place where everyone can call home, and it starts with that housing aspect.
By the way, we talk about transparency. Beyond the downtown issue, what other things are you going to be doing? I know, for instance, like Jake Day, for example, seemed to be out and about in the community, very engaged. Jack was much more, I guess, of a manager. Where do you fit yourself into that?
Yeah. So I feel like I have modeled myself after my county council race. So last cycle, I will say I received respect from both sides of the aisle for my ability to engage the community. And I was an at-large candidate, so I covered the entire county. And I think that ultimately that engagement is what got me to the appointment process. I think our city representatives saw that there was a candidate who was willing to go above and beyond the call of duty to engage residents, and I just plan on continuing that and being myself authentically. I'm a grassroots person at heart. I love engaging with the community, and I think we get the most amount of feedback when we are as hands-on as we can be out there.
One of the other issues that you talk about is public safety, and we've had a series of shootings just recently in and around Salisbury. What do you make of that? And it just seems as if those shootings are something, I guess, not necessarily new, but certainly we haven't seen that kind of shooting in a long time, and especially the mass shooting that we saw just not too long ago.
Yeah, it's definitely a big concern and something that I know a number of our leaders at the city and county level are working on and discussing. I know I've just had the chance to sit down with Acting Chief Mindshine, talking about some community-based initiatives that we can do. Ultimately, aside from working and making sure that our frontline workers are supported, our emergency workers are supported out there, it really is going to take a collaborative, hands-on approach. So working with the county, the city, law enforcement officers, but then also working with a lot of the community organizations, a lot of the faith-based organizations to really make sure that we can get to these people. Ultimately, my hope is to engage with, we're seeing a lot of the youth feel just lost. And again, I've mentioned COVID already, but COVID, I think, really impacted the youth as a whole. And that's really maybe why we're starting to see a lot of this tick up in crime. And these organizations, we really need to give the resources out to them so that they can engage the youth, make them feel a little bit more invested in this community, and put them right back on the right track, whether that be through community outreach efforts with our law enforcement. Last night, for instance, we did a neighborhood walk at the Newton Community Center. We just went door to door talking to residents about any of the concerns that they wanted to bring up to the city. We had a number of them, public safety being one of them, and we were able to take those comments and directly bring them back to Chief Mindshine, who was actually on the walk with us. I think a lot of that community policing is going to be a really big, important aspect of our journey moving forward.
Beyond law enforcement, what other elements do you see that are important to deal with this kind of violence? The violence itself is obviously a result of something. It's not a thing in and of itself. And, police officials, for instance, they have to deal with the immediate impact of violence. But what would you be looking for to try to deter or to find other ways to get around this kind of violence?
Yeah. I think it ultimately really does come back to community connection. And I say this often, but, and also working hand in hand with our school system. Now, I'm a little limited at the city with what I can do with the Board of Education, but we find great partners with them. So I know, for instance, specifically in my district, we partner with them at the Newton Community Center. We find opportunities to engage with the students there. I think those are going to be the best avenues. Community connection, finding ways for the youth of today to feel engaged and feel a part of, and ultimately feel heard. I do think a lot of this is stemmed from the fact that these are individuals who have been kind of disconnected from the community as a whole. And again, finding those avenues where we can bring them back in.
So in terms of your style, do you think that you're going to be more like, say, a Jake Day as opposed to, say, than his successor? I mean, do you think that's, I mean, how do you see that? Because
I'm going to be my own leader. Absolutely. Yeah. I think so far I have set myself apart on council as a pretty independent voice. And I continue to do that, and I have a lot of admiration for Mayor Day and Mayor Heath, but I am looking forward to, building a Salisbury that I think is going to be a home that everyone can be proud of. So I'm really looking forward to that moving forward.
Because one of the things, for instance, like Jack, he had overseen, for instance, corporate entities as well as nonprofits. Jake had his own experience. Running a city is a bit different than, say, I know your previous work was with, for instance, in the environmental community with wind. It seems like a fairly overwhelming task because you've got a lot of people reporting to you with a lot of moving parts. I mean, some people say, is she up to the job? I'll just put it that way.
Oh, fair enough. And I love the candidness. Absolutely. I will say, we talk about offshore wind, everyone hears environmental and they just go, okay, nonprofit. But in reality, what I did was I worked and developed 2 federal offshore wind projects here in Maryland. These were projects with multi-million-dollar budgets that I was working directly hands-on with. Not only that, but the process to develop these projects, the permitting that involves, means we were engaging with a lot of key players at the federal and state and local level, agencies and directors that I'm going to have personal relationships myself with when I become mayor. So I think having those relationships early on are actually a big benefit to us because there's not going to be a big transition like we've seen in recent months. It's going to be me just right off the bat being able to dive right in because I'll have those existing relationships already with our state delegates, with our directors, say at the Department of Commerce, Department of Labor. We have those relationships already to go.
In terms, by the way, of something like the budget and all these people that you're going to be responsible for. I mean, anything goes wrong, your name comes up, right? That's part of the job. I mean, that's much different than, say, outreach. I mean, being responsible for an entire city, particularly a growing city like this one. I mean, how do you? I don't want to say. How do you deal with that? I mean, in terms of your past experience, it's much different.
It isn't. I will say my previous role was director of stakeholder engagement for Maryland and Delaware markets. So it wasn't just the average outreach. It was a pretty comprehensive management plan. I worked with an entire team. I'm very familiar working with large project organizations. And at the end of the day, project management is project management. I have a lot of experience in that I can bring back with me to the city.
So, by the way, how do you see the relationship between the city and the county? We know that there's a lot of, upset, I guess, a lot of tension at the county level. Julie Giuliano, who's just taken over as the county executive, lots of personnel issues there. How do you see getting along with her, and how do you see getting along with the county?
Yeah, I will say I have wonderful relationships, both the county council and the county executive. Current issues with standing between them all. But I will say, Julie and I, from the very beginning, when we were both running our races together at the county level, were able to have pretty candid, open conversations. I have a lot of respect for her in that instance. She is authentically herself. She will just candidly state what she wants. And, very rarely do you meet individuals like that in the political realm. That being said, I have a large amount of respect for individuals like John Cannon on the county council. I know Shani Shields and Josh Hastings very well. So I will say, come November, if voters vote for me, we'll have a mayor who already has a pretty strong relationship with both branches of the county government.
A lot of the issues with the county center around, for instance, tax differential, how you see that, being sorted out, and even issues over the fire department and its responsibilities. How do you see that in relationship to the county?
I think some more discussions are going to have to be had right there. I know the big discussion was maybe the fire fee this most recent past cycle, which I was a pretty vocal opponent of from the gate. We were looking at a budget where we were already going to be seeing a raise in property taxes, water and sewer increases, on top of this proposed $300 fire fee. It just felt like a bit much for our residents. And I am aware of the supply chain increase costs, inflation across the state. But our residents are also feeling their purses being pinched a little bit. So we need to find other avenues where we can make do with what we have without having to raise up those costs. So thankfully, Mayor Heath at the time took back some of my comments regarding that fire fee. We were able to nix it and kind of work out a solution pretty quickly with County Executive Giordano.
So looking forward, what is your vision for the city? I mean, Jake had this grand vision, and we can see it play now out in the downtown, Unity Square, that kind of thing. Obviously, you're going to continue a lot of that. But do you have a particular vision for the city? Yeah.
And I will say a lot of respect for the vision that Jake had coming and reinvesting in the downtown community. I mean, like he mentioned, there is a heart to the city. However, I want to start focusing on the rest of the city. I think for a number of years, and our residents are kind of voicing that concern, downtown has been the focal point of development, of incentives, of just attention as a whole from our city government. And it's time to kind of spread that love out to the other corners of the city. So when I mentioned focusing on pockets of this community, I think right now I stand to be one of the few candidates who's focusing on a comprehensive overall view of the city, not just focusing on whether I like or don't like the development downtown or not. I'm looking to actually address every facet of this community as a whole.
Because there are portions of the city, I think, like Church Street, for instance, neighborhood, that sort of thing, that seem to have been neglected in times past. Is there some thought about how you want to revitalize those areas or deal with some of the issues that they face every day?
I have some of my ideas, absolutely. But I think first and foremost, what I want to do is revive the mayor's roundtable. I think that was something that previously to Jake Day, our former mayors had a lot of opportunity for collaboration, that a lot of success on feedback. And rather than me just right out the gate telling residents what I want to see, which I do have my own ideas, trust me. However, I think what's best for this community right now is to actually listen. Very rarely are we having leaders out there who pause and listen to their residents. So reviving those roundtables, getting the feedback from each district on what they're wanting to see, and then maybe bringing it into the folds of my vision as well, because I think really at the end of the day, it can't just be my vision. It has to be Salisbury's vision.
We've been speaking with Councilmember Megan Outten, who has announced her candidacy for mayor of Salisbury. Appreciate you stopping by and chatting with us.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
You're listening to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush. Jack Heath withdraws from the race for mayor as Salisbury City Council member Megan Outten jumps in. The judge in the trial for the hit-and-run death of Gavin Knupp says it's in the wrong court. Maryland First Lady makes an appearance at the Maryland Association of Counties Summer Conference, and Brian Russo looks at the idea behind Salisbury University's philosophy program for inmates at the Eastern Correctional Institution. This is Don Rush. Welcome to Delmarva Today. In our studio this afternoon is Greg Bassett, editor and general manager for the Salisbury Independent. And on the phone is Susan Canfor, reporter for Coastal Point. Welcome to the program.
Hey, Don.
Hi, Don.
So first I want to turn to you, Greg, and Jack himself. He dropped out of the race. What's the details behind that?
Yeah, Jack has had some health issues. He's 76. He had been being treated for some kidney ailments that they're not real sure about. And then apparently he had an episode on Friday night, a physical episode, which led him to decide over the weekend that he was not going to be a candidate for mayor anymore.
So has this been a long time coming, or did he have questions about it, or is this related to a specific incident? Because I know he was concerned, but last time I interviewed him, actually, he was concerned about his health.
Yeah, I don't think, being mayor of Salisbury was his plan for his, the later part of his retirement years. And it's certainly a stressful job. It's an all-encompassing job, and Jack certainly embraced it that way. There's all kinds of ways that you can be mayor. You can, really be involved, or you can not be as involved as much. There's no rules about that. But Jack made himself really involved, and he was working pretty hard. And I think it's beyond what maybe he wanted to do. And there are some great challenges in the city. And, in one of his statements, his later statements said that it was time to hand things over to a new generation. And I think he really believes that.
As a matter of fact, we now have, of course, Megan, who has jumped into the race. And here's what she had to say about her conversation with Jack.
The two of us had a pretty candid discussion over the weekend. He did confide in me, just where he stood, how he was feeling in terms of his health. And it became pretty evident that, this was a gentleman who had been a pillar of his community for so many decades and had been essentially waiting for that next generation to take up that pillar of that community. And I think we had just a moment where I candidly said, I'm ready. I'm excited. I'm ready to dive in. And I told him, I was like, I'm going to throw my hat in. And he was very candid and said, you have my full support.
So, Greg, she got the support of Jack. She got the support of Mayor Boda, the president of the city council. As we noted a moment ago, the former mayor, Jake Day, spoke highly of her when I talked to him. What do we know about her and the fact that she seems to have garnered all this support?
Yeah, Megan's one of those people. She's been around for a long time. She ran for county council in the last election, and she was able to prevail in the primary as a Democrat. She did not win as in the at-large seat for county council, but she got herself known from that. And then when Jack actually became mayor, she was appointed by the council to fill Jack's seat on the council. And she's been a pretty good council person so far. She's very attentive to the details. She gets good grades for answering constituent problems. When there's been questions about some of the city's decisions, she has stood up and tried to explain them. She's done a pretty good job as a council person. The problem would be is that she has not yet been elected to anything. So she was appointed to that seat. She's running for mayor. That election is in November. There is no primary. It's a winner-take-all situation. So it's going to be a tough time. It's going to be a difficult time to get elected mayor and to get more people to know who she is. But she certainly got some skills.
Because it seems to me is that this thing sort of happened at the very last minute. I mean, Jack announced that he wasn't going to run. I think it was on Tuesday. And then suddenly there she was running. And see that as being coordinated, trying to clear the decks here?
Yeah, I'm concerned about that because Jack did not make the announcement until 4:30 on Tuesday, which was the deadline. And I don't know if that's just happenstance. She did announce her candidacy around noontime that day. Then he announced his decision to withdraw at the very end of the day. Some people took that as Megan filed, so Jack got scared and got out of it. But I think, as she said, there was a conversation over the weekend where she told him she was ready, that she won his support, and I think maybe helped him make that decision not to run.
So what do we know about her in terms of her background? Because I understand she's been obviously involved with the wind projects, for example, but she's never held a position like this before.
No, she hasn't. She's very involved in the Democratic and progressive politics. She's got a great friend base. There's no doubt about that. She's got a lot of supporters. People believe in her. And by all accounts, so far, she's going to run a very professional campaign. She's going to have some money. She's got some early support. So she's not just going to run a Facebook campaign, a social media campaign, or a word-of-mouth campaign. I think she's going to get out there and have volunteers and go door to door. She's going to get herself known. But in terms of her professional credentials, no, it's not classic, not by any means. But the people who have been mayor of Salisbury haven't always had a classical training in this sort of thing. And one of the rare exceptions was Jake Day, who was a community planner and an architect, well-known, grew up in the community, loved the community, decided to stay in the community, got elected to the city council, served there as council president, and then used that to become mayor. So he was certainly more more qualified, more credentialed than Megan is. But compared to the other people who are running, she's the one who is in a city council position, so she might be ahead of them in terms of the ability.
One of the things that struck me was that if she does win, you're going to have a young woman who's mayor of Salisbury, and then you also have another young woman who's now the county executive. A first for this city. We've had women in the past, for instance, for mayorship, but nonetheless, it looks like a new generation, as it were, very young generation, at least for me.
Right. Our one female mayor in Salisbury was Barry Parsons-Stillman, of course, who was the quintessential mom in tennis shoes, who had some issues with things and wanted to be mayor and change things. Was very neighborhood driven. Jake Day was elected as mayor at age 33. One of the youngest in history was Frank Morris, the great Frank Morris, who served a term in the 60s. He was also 30 when he was elected, but Frank was an all-star in the business community with Shore Distributors, well-known. Everyone loved Frank. And he did lose his re-election, which was bizarre. But at the same time, being 30, you're going to make different decisions than someone who might be more, not wisdom, but more established.
And we'll have a little interview with Megan Outten later in the program. Susan, Maryland's new governor, Wes Moore, made an appearance before the Maryland Association of County Summer Conference. Well, what did he have to say?
Yes, he did. And he's a very impressive young man, Don. He's the first African-American governor of Maryland, and he's only 44 years old. I was very impressed with him. I covered his closing remarks at the MACO conference in Ocean City last Saturday morning, and he was greeted with really rousing applause as he walked out onto the stage in a blue suit, a dark blue suit, and a white shirt with an open collar. And he joked that he learned a lot about MACO during the, 4 days, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, that it was held last week. And he said one of the things he learned was that flip-flops constitute business casual. He said he saw more county officials in shorts last Wednesday through Saturday than he ever hoped to, and he didn't want to see them in shorts ever again. And that, of course, made the audience laugh, and he easily warmed them up to himself. And they laughed and they applauded, and then he got serious. Even though he's very charismatic, he got serious, and he talked about wanting the state to put trust in him as he works on the upcoming budget. He said that a disciplined approach is very necessary, and that Maryland's economy has to grow, and that growth will help make the state stronger. One of the things he said is our budgets have gotten bigger over time, but our economy has not kept pace. He said when he took office, the economy was nearly the same size as it was 4 years ago. But over that same time, one of our neighbors, Pennsylvania, for example, grew by $22 billion. And he said, here's why that matters, because our families feel it. Last year, total personal income in Maryland grew at nearly half the rate of the nation. The average New Jerseyan saw an extra $1,700 in their bank account, but the average Marylander only saw another $1,000. While he's new to politics, he said he's been an entrepreneur, and he's not new to balance sheets. He might be new to politics, he said, but he's not new to balance sheets, and he knows they don't lie. He praised Maryland, with a state, for having some of the best talent and assets in the world. But he said the problem is the economy is not reaching its full potential. That means the state's ability to meet the full needs of its residents is hampered. And then Governor Moore did a little self-back-patting when he said from his first day in office, he has insisted the state make use of the money that it had. The money was kept in reserve, and then he became rather serious when he told the audience the time for discipline is now.
But also, by the way, you caught up with Maryland's First Lady, Dawn Moore. She attended as well. Let me give you a little sense about what she had to tell you in her interview with you.
My aunt was very good friends with his aunt, and when she met my husband, she had heard a lot about him, but when she met him, she said, oh, you have to meet my niece. You are both very involved in public service, and you would just be a great match. I was actually working on a campaign at that time. I was running the local portion of Kathleen Kennedy Townsend's campaign, the eldest daughter of Bobby Kennedy. I was pretty entrenched in that race in Prince George's County.
So, Susan, how did she strike you?
Don, it took several weeks to get approval to interview First Lady Dawn Moore. They were kind of protective of her. But I'm happy to say we were the only ones to sit down with her. We were the only news reporter. I was the only news reporter from WESM to sit down with her. And I found her to just be absolutely delightful, very open and laughing, and, like we've known each other for an awful long time. She was welcoming and easy to approach. She talked about her husband, who she repeatedly praised as a promise keeper. And she told me about their children, their son Jamie and their younger daughter Mia, who were not in Ocean City with them last weekend. They were with, I think she said, away with some cousins. And their little rescue dog, Tucker is a Shih Tzu mix because he doesn't shed. And the First Lady has allergies, so they had to find a dog that didn't shed. She's 48 years old and a native of Queens, New York. You can hear some of that Queens, New York accent in her speech, which we heard just there, and what I heard during the 20 minutes or so that I talked to her. Like you just let us hear their aunts, the governor's aunt and her aunt, introduce them. Both of them have been and were at that time involved in public service. She worked under former Maryland Lieutenant Governor Kathleen Kennedy Townsend. She ran for delegate to the Democratic National Convention representing Senator John Edwards, and she won the primary. But for some reason, she didn't attend the convention, and she was replaced by another delegate. She also worked under Governor Paris Glendening, and is very involved now in community service. She told me that she's interested in mental health and improving mental health services in the state and making them easier to get. And she also is interested in empowering women, creating economic opportunities, especially for those who don't have those opportunities, for her, who kind of felt left out of the process. And she cares about youth development, and she's also very interested in the arts. She told me that her mother taught her to be an advocate. That's where she learned her community service spirit. It's where she got that spirit. And her mother told her to get involved, to understand what's happening in the community. And her mother, she said, was the one who prepared her for this moment as First Lady. It was very obvious that she really enjoys being First Lady. I think she and her husband have really a nice relationship. She was just all smiles when she talked about him. She said everything he does well, and he keeps his promises. He's a good father. He plays football with his little boy on the lawn there at the State House, and, you know, they both do things with both children. When he's with a little boy, she's with a little girl. And they seem to have a very nice marriage and a very well-established family. So I think we're going to see great things from this family. I wouldn't be at all surprised to see Governor Moore run for president someday. He has the charisma, the ability, and the speaking ability, and he has the intelligence and, you know, just the sense of service to the community that exactly is what we'd like to see in a future president. I asked her that. I asked her if he has any aspirations for a higher office, and she kind of laughed and thought about that for a minute. And then she said, you know, he's way too busy right now being governor for us to really answer that question yet. But keep an eye on him. I think you're going to see that young man go far.
We've been speaking with Susan Canfor. She's a reporter for Coastal Point, and also Greg Bassett, editor and general manager for the Salisbury Independent. Appreciate both of you stopping by and chatting with us this afternoon.
Thanks, Don.
All right. Thank you, Don.
You're listening to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush.
Delmarva Today with Don Rush.